All right, today we're diving into something huge, a topic that gets right to the heart of how we trust information, science's so-called credibility crisis. Now, this isn't a story about losing faith in science, not at all. It's actually about how science is making itself stronger, and we're going to unpack exactly how.
So let's just start with the really basic question. When you see a news headline about some amazing new study, can you actually trust it? For a while now, there's been this growing feeling, especially in fields like psychology and social science, that the answer isn't always a simple yes.
And this whole thing has a name, the credibility crisis. At its core, it's pretty simple. It's about whether a study's results can be checked and verified. If other smart scientists can't get the same results, well, it calls the original finding into question. And just to be clear, this usually isn't about fraud. It's about making the whole process of science more open and rock solid.
Okay, so these two words are absolutely key: reproducibility and replicability. Reproducibility is step one. It's just, can I take your exact data and your computer code and get the same answer? Replicability is the bigger test. If I run a whole new study, will I find something similar? You literally can't even think about the second one without the first. Reproducibility is the bedrock.
So what's the fix? Well, it's definitely not to throw our hands up and trust science less. It's the opposite. The answer is to make the entire process more open, more transparent. It's about shining a giant spotlight on every single step of the journey so anyone can see exactly how a researcher got from A to B.
So here's our game plan. We'll look at what this path to transparency actually looks like, walk through a two-part research playbook, talk about reporting results, and then zoom out to see how we can build a more open science for everyone.
I absolutely love this analogy because it's perfect. Remember back in math class when your teacher would say, "Show your work"? It wasn't just about getting the right answer. It was about proving you knew how you got there. That's exactly what we're talking about with transparency in science.
And this isn't just one thing you do at the end. Transparency has to be woven through the entire research process, from your initial idea to the study's blueprint to how you measure things, how you crunch the numbers, and finally, how you report what you found.
Okay, let's jump right into this playbook, starting at the very beginning. Long before any data gets collected, a researcher has a theory and a plan. Being transparent right here at the start is the foundation for everything else.
The big idea here is simple. Lay your cards on the table from the get-go. What are you trying to do? Who are you studying? And maybe most importantly, you have to separate your predictions made before you see the data, that's a priori, from the ideas that pop into your head after you see the data, that's post hoc. It stops people from just painting a target around the arrow after it lands.
This brings up a fascinating point. There's this practice called THARKing. It stands for hypothesizing after the results are known. And it's a problem if you pretend you predicted it all along. But the solution isn't to stop thinking, it's to be honest. THARKing, or transparently harking, is a great way to generate new ideas for the next study as long as you're crystal clear that it's an exploration, not a confirmation. Okay, so you've laid out your theory. What's next? The research design, basically the blueprint for your study. How are you actually going to collect the evidence? The details here? They are everything.
A truly transparent design section is like an open book test. It tells you if it was an experiment or a survey, who the participants were and how they were picked, and was the study big enough to find a real effect. Critically, it also tells you what other variables the researchers measured and controlled for in their analysis. Let's zoom in on that last point, because honestly, this is where things can get really murky. Researchers use control variables to rule out other explanations, but the choices they make about which ones to include can sometimes completely flip the results. Picture this. A researcher finds a really cool link between variable A and variable B. But then they decide to add a control variable, C. And poof, the relationship between A and B suddenly vanishes. If the researcher never tells us they even tried adding C, we have no way of knowing if the first result was real or just a statistical fluke. And that's the bottom line, right? Without knowing which variables were considered and why they were included or excluded, we just can't trust the conclusion. We can't tell if a finding is robust or if it's just an illusion created by a bunch of hidden decisions. And that's a massive barrier to credibility.
Now let's get to the next phase of the playbook. We have a theory, we have a design, but how exactly do we measure our concepts and analyze the data we collect?
You know, when a study says it's measuring something abstract, like leadership, we need to know what they actually mean by that. Transparency here means sharing the exact questions they asked. And this is a big one. If a researcher takes a standard questionnaire and decides to drop a few questions they don't like, they have to tell us. Why? Because now it's a whole new scale, and you can't rely on any of the old evidence that it was a good measure.
I mean, think about it. You can't just pick and choose the questions from a leadership survey that happen to make your theory look good and then still claim you're measuring leadership. You're not. You're measuring a custom variable that's already biased in your favor. Full transparency stops that kind of thing in its tracks.
Okay, now for the analysis itself. It's not like the old days where you could just say you ran a regression. Today, there are a million ways to do that. To be transparent, you need to say exactly what software you used, and ideally, just share the computer code itself so anyone can rerun it perfectly. And that includes being totally upfront about weird data points, like outliers.
And outliers. Wow, this is so important. An outlier is just one extreme data point, right? A person who answers way differently than everyone else. But what you do with that one data point, keep it, delete it, can completely flip a study's results. It can be the difference between a significant finding and nothing at all. If you don't say how you handled them, your work is just not reproducible. Period.
All right, this brings us to the final critical piece of the puzzle, actually sharing what you found. This is where all that hard work comes together, and where a lack of transparency can unfortunately hide everything that came before it.
Yeah, it turns out that even in published papers, there are a lot of common blind spots. Things like not really explaining what you did with missing data, reporting results in a really vague way, or failing to tell us how big an effect really is in the real world. Each little thing chips away at our ability to really trust the finding. Let's make this super concrete. Opaque reporting says something like P was less than 0.05. Transparent reporting gives you the exact number. P was 0.047. Vague reporting says there was a significant effect. Clear reporting tells you the effect size, how big it is, and the confidence interval. It's the difference between a blurry sketch and a high-def photo.
And that really is the whole point, isn't it? Transparent reporting puts the power back in the reader's hands. It gives you all the information you need to judge the evidence for yourself instead of just having to take the author's word for it.
So, we've talked a lot about what individual scientists can do. But for this to really stick, it can't just be about individual good choices. The whole system, the way science gets funded, reviewed, and published, has to change. It really does take a village.
And everybody in the scientific community has a part to play here. Journals can change their submission rules. Editors can tell reviewers to make transparency a priority. Reviewers can call it out when it's missing. And the agencies that give out the money can demand it. Everyone has a lever they can pull. Let me give you a really powerful, practical example. For years, one of the biggest excuses for not being transparent was not enough space in the print journal. Well, that's over. Journals can now have unlimited online supplements, a place to put all the nitty-gritty details, the data, the code, everything. No more excuses.
And this next one, this is a real game changer. It's the idea of a registered report. This is where researchers submit their introduction and their methods for review before they even collect the data. If the plan is solid, the journal accepts the paper, no matter what the results are. This one change totally removes the pressure to find splashy, positive results, and instead rewards asking good, rigorous questions. And when you put all of this together, the benefits are just massive. It completely changes the incentives in science, rewarding people for being careful and honest, not just for getting a flashy result. It makes training better for the next generation, and it builds a culture that values getting it right over getting a neat story.
What this all leads to is a scientific culture where the process is celebrated just as much as the outcome. The goal is a system that rewards rigor, honesty, and teamwork, creating a base of knowledge that is stronger, more trustworthy, and ultimately way more useful for all of us.
So I'll just leave you with this one last thought. Imagine a world where every new scientific claim didn't just show you the finished cake, but handed you the full, detailed, step-by-step recipe to bake it yourself. What would that mean for progress? For all of us? That's the promise of open science. And it's a future that's being built as we speak.